Hey guys, it's your favorite sisters with the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast. On the show, you'll hear caregivers confessing the good, the bad, and the completely unexpected. You're guaranteed to relate, be inspired, leave with helpful tips and resources, and of course, laugh. Now, let's jump right in to today's guest confession. You know, we were bantering back and forth with our guest, but you're dancing.
I know, I'm kind of swaying in the wind. Remember that movie with Jodie Foster?
Tay in the Wind?
Tay in the Wind.
I knew you were going to say Tay in the Wind.
I love that movie.
I don't remember Tay in the Wind. I think it was just you who watched it.
I did.
And you always asked.
Liam Neeson and Tay.
Oh, that's right, because it was the piano.
So beautiful.
Was it the name of the piano?
No,
and she was mute?
No, that was...
Well, that's not this
Moving
podcast.
Moving on.
So I'm going to tell you right now. We were talking with our guests for today a little bit before, and we were talking about the challenges. You just had a call from Mom.
Yes.
That's going to be its own episode.
Yes.
And that was a hard thing. And JJ said, I'm probably going to, if I, start crying and walk away and go have a drink. And then our guest was so generous and was like, it's only 8:30 here, but it's never too early.
Yeah.
And so
I like her attitude.
Spoken like a true caregiver.
Yeah.
So
let's roll.
Everybody's like, I want to hear what she has to say. And because she knows she's drinking tequila with some toast. I can feel it. And so
she's like, no, guys. So I got to tell you, let me tell you who our guest is today, because this is fun, and I'm going to tell you why. So her name is Kate Washington, and Kate is an author. She's many other things, but I'm going to tell you the name of her book, because when I saw it online, it cracked me up. It's called Already Toast.
And it's burnt toast, too.
It is burnt toast. It's Already Toast, Caregiving and Burnout in America.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like toast, Kate, and I think the name is just perfect, because I know we've had conversations. Natalie, I've called and I've been like, I'm toasted, I'm done, and that is
stick a fork in me.
I'm done. So perfect name. We love it already. And I'm going to say you will not find this in the fiction section of the library. It is totally a nonfiction book. Her story started in 2015. She cared for her now former husband for several years through his treatment for a very rare form of lymphoma and a subsequent near-fatal bone marrow transplant. But Kate says she quickly became burned out and frustrated by the demands placed on her as his caregiver. There are a lot of reasons for that. Medical system, everything that goes along with it. She says the strains of his ordeal and our caregiving relationship were immense personal and relationship challenges. The couple separated in 2022. Today, she is a voice for the caregiver and a frequent speaker on the challenges facing caregivers. She lives like this, too. She lives in Sacramento with her 2 daughters, one very friendly dog, and, Kate, one very unfriendly cat.
Okay, that's actually really funny.
Love that part.
So like a friendly dog and an unfriendly cat.
Hey, we are so excited to have you here.
So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so, here's the thing. I see that you've got 2 daughters, which is clearly we align with that. Mm-hmm. Is the dog a cat or the dog a cat? Is the dog a girl and is the cat a girl?
They are all girls, yes. A female household.
Yes. Love it.
Yes, we totally support that. So we always joke. The reason I ask is because we always joke that in our house when we grew up, there were our poor dad. He had 3 daughters, and he would always say, even the dogs are girls. And
says no win for him.
Yeah, so it was a no win, but we love that because we're all about it. And so of course the first grandchild would be a boy.
Thank the Lord.
And so we didn't know what to do with all that mess. But needless to say, he turned out fine.
Yeah.
Kate, I'm so happy to have you with us. I met you months ago, and we've been trying to get you on here and to tell your story because it is so unique and one that is not uncommon, and that's the thing. And so I can't wait to start this. So I want to jump in. Let's jump in. So Kate, tell us Tell us about your background. Tell us about, growing up, where you're from, all the deets. Like you were born, but then, skip the part of the childbirth part.
Sure. Well, so I was born and raised in a smallish town called Chico, California. That's about an hour and a half north of where I live now. My mom was a computer programmer, which was unusual for her time. I'm 52 now. And my dad was both an almond grower and a lawyer and still does both of those things.
Wow.
He's turning 80 this month, so he's a real, he will never retire. Hard
So he's
worker.
still an attorney and an almond
Yeah,
grower.
he still does some, yeah. And my brother is following in his footsteps. My brother moved back home. I have the one sibling.
Wait, in the almond farm or the attorney farm?
Both.
This is great.
Okay, we like that already. Keep going.
Okay, keep going.
family.
We actually also, his retirement project was putting in a few acres of olives. So we press olive oil every fall. So that was his retirement project, and then he didn't retire. So a lot's happening.
Oh, yeah.
Now we want to go to California so we can go and do part 2 on the almond and olive farm.
Yeah, I like this.
I like this. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So my parents divorced when I was in high school. I went very far away to college. I went to Washington, D.C. I was like excited to leave what felt like a small town.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, that was a real culture shock, but it was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
After college, I hightailed it back to California. I went to graduate school and immediately went into a Ph.D. program in Victorian literature.
Oh, wow.
So I did that for 5 years in my 20s, and that's where I met my husband. He was also a graduate student in English literature.
Okay.
And what brought us to Sacramento is that he got a job at Sacramento State University. I left academia and went into editing and writing. So I've been a freelance writer for the last 20 years since we moved to Sacramento. And my first daughter was born in 2005, and then second one in 2009. So as a college student and a high school sophomore.
It sounds like I want to say this, but it sounds like a pretty normal life. You're just kind of like, I was born, I have a cool family, I go to college, I get a little crazy, decide to go cross country.
I like the
go
part
back.
of like, I'm leaving the West Coast to the East Coast, and you're like, yeah, it's about enough of that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back.
It kind of was.
Yeah, I mean, that is like the
It feels
idea.
kind of normal.
Yeah,
like
I go to college,
everyday
I
life.
meet my husband, we have some kids. I do have to ask, so you were a writer before this book. What were your topics on those books? What did you write about previously?
Oh, this was my first book.
Oh, okay.
But I was mainly in like magazine and newspaper journalism as a freelancer, and the main part of my work was food writing. So I was a restaurant reviewer for a number of years, and a recipe developer, and wrote like features about restaurants and food, farming, beverage, whatever I could get my hands on. And then because freelancing is tough, I basically wrote about anything somebody would pay me to write about. So.
I think that may have a correlation to the toast, I have to say, Kate. I don't know.
Possibly so. Possibly so.
You're channeling your inner foodie.
I know.
I feel like I would love to be. I had never thought about like when people are like, if you could be another job, if you could have another job, I think it would be like a food tester. Like not like the food tester, like when you're putting it together, but like going to restaurants and just reviewing. But it'd be the whole writing part that I wouldn't.
Yeah,
be
we would
great
have
at.
to assign
Anyway,
that task. Yes.
bygones. And so, okay, that sounds fun. So you've got kids, you're living your life, and caregiving happened. Like when did where does because typically care happens in a slow burn or it is in a crisis.
Well, I got a taste of both, but I'm actually going to back up a little bit and say that I had expectations of providing care to my mother, who after my parents' divorce had moved to Sacramento. So we just happened to move to the city where she already was living. And she had a number of health problems and was also bipolar and really struggled with her mental health. So when my daughters were 4 years old and an infant, my mom was 64, she really started to have increasing health problems, some as side effects of medication she'd had to be on for her mental health for a long time. And then her mental health really started to deteriorate.
Yeah.
So I was expecting to be giving care to my mother for a number of years and kind of expecting to be a sandwiched caregiver with her and having my young children. And to be honest, I was kind of dreading that. You know, she wasn't always the easiest. I loved her very much, but she wasn't always the easiest. And then as it turned out, she took her life when my older daughter was 4 and my younger daughter was 6 months old. And so I'd done a lot of care and intervention, but of a very different kind. And I wanted to call that out just for any listeners. Like, I think often caring for people with mental illness is not thought of as part of caregiving, and it absolutely is, and it's a really challenging part of caregiving. So I got kind of that taste of that and really intense grief that was really difficult to cope with, as you might imagine. And part of the reason I mention that also is that I think it's sort of part of my caregiving story in the sense that I thought, oh, like caregiving is done. Like, very sadly, my mother is gone, but that's who I expected to have an intense care relationship with. Yeah. Like, for a long time, I really thought I would be taking care of her. And that changed in an instant. But then my husband got really severely sick only about 4 years later. Mm-hmm. So
let me ask you a question.
I was still reeling from the grief.
Yeah.
Honestly, by the time he got sick.
Yeah, I think the question is good because I do want to back up because Natalie and I are, I think, talking about mental health is really important because those caregivers, especially people with mental health issues or substance abuse issues, are sometimes not recognized. And those are some of the hardest, that's some of the hardest caregiving that people have to do.
And there's so much stigma around it. And I think I'm so grateful to you for bringing this up because in our efforts to try to find diverse caregivers to share their experiences, you know, mental illness, there's so many people that care for people with mental illness and support them. And a lot of people don't see themselves as caregivers for that person because they're like, I'm just trying to help them. And I'm like, yeah. And so, because it doesn't look like, it's not your traditional accepted, quote unquote, of a chronic illness, a complex illness, a aging person, or a person with a disability, right? Mental illness is very invisible until it shows itself. And it shows itself by going into acute hospitalization, a psychosis. It could be erratic behavior, that sort of thing. So I just think I can imagine that being very challenging. Yeah. And at some point, I think we may say, come back and let's talk about that. I'll say that. If you're open to that, come back and talk about that.
Absolutely. And it's certainly something I never recognized as caregiving. I just thought it was conflict with my mom, trying to get her to get help, get seen. You know, there were medical issues that I had to help and support her with. But the idea of caregiving as part of my life wasn't really on my radar. And I think there's so many kinds of caregiving, to your point about mental illness or substance, caring for folks with substance abuse issues. Yes. So many kinds of caregiving that people don't even recognize as such. You know, there's financial caregiving, there's the logistics, there's calling the insurance. Like, it's so much more than helping somebody in and out of a shower for their activities of daily living or some of the hands-on things that are very visible as caregiving.
Yeah, I really like that you kind of referred to it as financial caregiving and, you know, helping with your health insurance caregiving, because it's true. And honestly, there are people who typically get paid to assist in those types of things, like they're experts. And when you become a caregiver, you suddenly become the expert. You're almost like an HR generalist. Like, I have to know everything related to human resources, and God bless those people, because they have to be able to fill out all the forms, but also make sure they're not going to get, you know, in trouble, and all the things are, you know, everybody's doing what they need to do, and everybody's happy so that they stay.
At the same time,
So it's, caregiver generalist. I kind of like that. Yeah. So, you know I'm actually going to take our break right now. It's a little early, and that's okay, because I want to get into, you had that grief, and I want to talk about that grief that you had. And then caregiving said, you're not done yet, lady. Yeah. We'll be right back.
Absolutely.
All right, everybody. We are back here with Kate Washington, author of Already Toast.
Love that.
Talking about caregiving. And Kate lost her mom, and she is grieving. It's been 4 years, and your husband becomes ill. We want to touch a little bit on what that grieving looks like, the state of mind that you're in, because you have 2 little ones.
You have little people.
You have little people in your life. I'm assuming that you're working. So tell me a little bit about that scenario. Where are you in your life right then at that moment when you're getting ready to go into this caregiving mode?
Well, I'll tell you, it was the actual day my younger daughter started kindergarten was the first inkling we really had of my husband's illness.
Yeah.
And I had been absolutely overwhelmed. My brother and I were co-executors of my mom's will. And if you've ever executed an estate, you know it is not for the faint of heart. It took like a year and a half. My, now former husband had taken on a much more demanding job. Just a few months after my mother's death, he became chair of his department with all of the, extra politics and challenges that comes with.
Yeah.
And so I'd kind of like moved over. We'd had a much more egalitarian, I think, balance around parenting and working. And his more demanding job meant that like I took a lot more of that load during his term as the chair. So I was coming out of like 5 extremely demanding years of having an infant, having a toddler, being the primary parent, trying to work, though I didn't work as much after my mother's death, in part due to some inheritance, which I want to like call out as a privilege that I was extremely fortunate to have when we went into Brad, my ex-husband's illness, because it gave us some reserves against, how devastating a major illness can be.
Yeah.
So by the time Lucy, my younger daughter, was starting kindergarten, I was like, thank goodness I'm going to have some time. Yeah. She's going to go to aftercare until her big sister is done at 3 or whatever the time was. I'm going to have almost full days to write, to work on things, to catch up, to like breathe. I had felt like I had not taken a breath in 4 years.
Take a nap.
And so,
maybe,
a nap. I remember after my mother died, I was seeing a therapist to help cope with the grief.
Yeah.
And she was older than I was. And, I had this 4-year-old and this 6-month-old who did not sleep. And she's like, what I really envision for you and what I feel you need is complete rest. And I was like, can you come do the laundry then? Like, there was no rest. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. I just looked at her like she was speaking a language from another planet. I had no idea.
Yeah, that's a sleep
what that could possibly look like.
That's Publishers
Is
Clearinghouse
that covered
today.
by benefits? Just complete rest for my mental
I'm a
health.
freelance writer, so
There's
if
no
I don't work,
rest.
I don't get paid.
That's exactly right.
And my children go hungry and CPS gets called and it's awkward and people judge you and it's terrible. So I guess I won't rest. Because that's what people
kindergarten.
Go ahead.
So kindergarten was starting. I am in my kitchen. I had a little desk in my kitchen, and thinking like, okay, what projects am I going to, dive into? And Brad comes into the kitchen. He's always like worn a beard, and he has his like fingers on the side of his jaw, and he's like, I have these weird lumps on my jaw. Do you think I should go to the doctor? And I was like, and I looked at him. He'd lost like 30 pounds that year. He's not a big guy, and he'd been going to the gym more, but I'm like, I'm also the cook, so I know what food we're eating. And I looked at him and I was like, you should definitely go to the doctor. And that was like the first, you mentioned there's the slow burn and the crisis of caregiving. That was my first slow burn caregiving moment with him.
Yeah.
Where we sort of entered into that world of like, yes, you should find out what's happening. And it took many months for him to get a diagnosis, a lot of stress of like, is this what it is? Like, I was doing research. We were both Googling ill-advisedly about symptoms and different things.
Google is Satan's playground.
Yeah.
Sorry, Google, but I'm sorry, but takes you down this bad road and my husband would say, it always takes you to cancer. Like, there's never anything but cancer, which is the sad part, which is why you have to be careful with Google.
But yes, but it can also take you to like vetted actual, double-blind studies that tell you things about very rare diseases or things that you might not, learn about from the doctor. So it is a double-edged sword in many ways. And I think that research and talking to people and like, eventually calling a rare disease society for information part of caregiving is another under-recognized portion of caregiving is, information gathering.
That's
so.
Right.
He finally, in about February, from September to February is how long it takes to get clear biopsy results, because he had a couple that were inconclusive. And it turned out to be a very rare form of lymphoma that didn't even have a name. And initially the doctor was like, oh, it could just be watch and wait. We don't really have to treat. We pushed for treatment, pushed for a second opinion. And so that that whole process took about 9 months or longer. Along the way, he started to cough. We took the girls to Hawaii for spring break because we were like, okay, we got to get some fun in here. We'd been uncertain about what to tell them before we knew what treatment might look like. There was a denial of the initial treatment that the doctor suggested. The health insurance denied. So we were kind of fighting about that, fighting with them, but trying to get some possible, treatment going. And we'd had to really push the doctor even to say like, oh no, we definitely don't want to just watch and wait. So come May, he's still coughing. It was like this warm day. I was working in the garden all day. I make dinner. We're sitting down to dinner. And he kind of yells, come here from the bathroom. I was annoyed because the girls were bickering. They'd had me do their nails and then they'd smudged them terribly within 30 seconds. So they were like, I need my nails fixed. And they were bickering about that. And dinner was on the table getting cold. And I'm like, where is this guy? Why isn't he coming to sit down at the table? That was like my last moment of like normal annoyance. I go in the bathroom. He is coughing up like massive amounts of blood into a bucket.
Wow.
Just like, it was horrifying, terrifying. And that was the crisis moment of getting plunged into caregiving, where it felt really seriously like we are all of a sudden in the thick of caregiving.
Yeah.
So I called a neighbor to come sit with the girls. I was like, help yourself to dinner. Don't know why I didn't think to call 911, but I just put him in the front seat of the car and drove through every red light to the hospital because the ER is like a mile away. So we went and did that. He was hospitalized. It turned out he'd had a lung tumor growing from the lymphoma that had been on a blood vessel and had ruptured. And it had been missed in all of the diagnostics. They hadn't done a PET scan, which I would have, like now, if I were thinking about had it to do over, I would have insisted on a PET scan at a much earlier stage. But that kind of plunged us into, major treatment. He got a collapsed lung from the chemo that he was administered, and then he had chemo all that summer. So that was like the summer of 2015, was him being inpatient for chemo every few weeks, the girls home, me juggling all of that. And, the chemo was pretty effective. So it shrank down all the tumors, everything. By September, he was pronounced okay.
Mm-hmm.
By mid-September, the lumps were back.
Wow.
So
it's
that was when
it's heartbreaking.
And my birthday is in October. And so he started to feel the lumps in September, calls the doctor, and he's like, whoa, it'd be very surprising if it were anything like that. And it's like, let's get this man a PET scan. We heard it would be very surprising if so many times, and everyone was always surprised. I never want to hear that phrase again.
Yeah.
So I remember we got back the PET scan results. It happened to be on my birthday. So we're out at my birthday dinner, and they had just told him that he would need a bone marrow transplant to have even a chance at survival, because this cancer that initially they hadn't wanted to treat was actually extremely aggressive. So that put us into a whole new world of like finding a donor. Fortunately, his brother was a match. Going into transplant he went into the hospital for transplant on the beginning of January of 2016, and he did not come home until mid-May.
Wow. So let me ask you this. I hear a lot about, this timeline, and I can relate to the timeline. I think any caregiver can, because I can tell you February 14th, March the 4th, then April 13th. I can tell you the dates of scans and tests and impactful things around Jason, for example. But if you were to be like, so what was going on with you during those times? How are you feeling? How are you working with the girls? What's the impact on the family, your friends, your extended family? Tell me about that.
I mean, it's so interesting that you say that about the dates, because I sometimes think like fixating on the dates is much easier, and what happened is so much easier than reflecting on like how painful all of that was. And that, I kind of walled off some of that pain over the time of the caring, it was obviously really shocking and upsetting for the girls. I really tried to focus on making sure that they were still had access to fun things, had access to, I took them on some little trips. Some of the time, because all of his chemo was done in the hospital, he would be in the hospital for 5 days. And so I would take them to the cabin or camping or to the beach for a couple of days of that time, just to it helped me get out of my head. It helped the three of us have fun and do things. And I remember all of that time as kind of unrelentingly grim. Yeah. But recently I found some voice memos that I had the girls make when Brad was in the hospital for the bone marrow transplant. Mm-hmm. And at that time, he lost his vision and was so weak and so ill that he couldn't even FaceTime with them or talk on the phone. And his appearance would have been upsetting. So this is fast forward to in the time of the bone marrow transplant, because he was really extraordinarily ill and he didn't see them for close to 3 months, I think. So I had the girls make voice memos that he could listen to, and I stumbled across some of them, and it was the girls in their little kid voices, and now one's in college and one's in high school, but in their little kid voices saying Mommy's taking us for a hike and we're going to go to this and we're going to do this and the adventure club is going to this. And, and I was oh, obviously they're putting a good face on it for their dad, but also I had this moment that really made me cry of oh, I actually kept their childhoods going for them. And that felt like a really high priority to me, but was hard to make happen. But I did make some choices of spending time with them when I could have been in the hospital with him. Mm-hmm. But I felt like they needed a parent more. And Brad's parents were with us for a lot of time. He's Canadian and they came from Canada and were here for a long time. So they would visit if I were taking the girls away, so he had some support.
And that's something,
I'll
say this, that's something I never had to face because Jason and I didn't have children. I can't even imagine trying to split your time. And the reality is, as parents, the parents would say, these are our children, and we have to find the balance somehow. So typically, I know with another couple that had it, the parents focused on the kids, even though pickles. Mm-hmm. Even though they would, this pickle family, I love the pickle family. Even though he was sick, he was so sick, but they would put on this, they would divide and conquer to make sure the girls had the least impact that they could try to control, knowing that they would be impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. I tried that to the best that I could. Yeah. I was, increasingly, a lot of my memories of that time are kind of a blur as they relate to me, because I did have to kind of wall off that emotion.
Yeah.
And, there were multiple times, there were times when Brad was outright given a terminal diagnosis. Mm-hmm. There were times when I was told he had a 10% chance of living for extended periods. And, I think that I kind of had that walled off feeling in part because I was trying to pre-grieve or trying to protect myself. And ultimately, I think that both was a sign of and leading to burnout, because one of those hallmarks is, losing that empathy, getting into that robotic state where you're just going through the motions, which is eventually after a year plus of pretty intense illness and caregiving, I definitely got to that state, and it damaged our relationship for sure. He was by necessity, because he was so ill, completely withdrawn from the relationship. He couldn't help that. Yeah. But I withdrew from it too, out of self-protection, because the whole ordeal was so painful. Yeah. And because I felt like if I sat down and felt my feelings, I put this in the book at one point, I felt like if I sat down and felt my feelings and started to cry, I might never get back up. Yes. I might just stay in bed. And I had already had that experience of powering through the grief with my mother because I had really little kids and I couldn't stop to, let my world fall apart.
Did you
because
have,
the kids were relying on me.
Yeah, no, and I apologize for interrupting. Did you
No.
have continue your counseling during this time? Did you have time?
I was in therapy. I had seen different therapists at different times, but I was seeing a therapist while Brad was ill. And that was really like hard to keep that time open, but it was very much like damage control. It was just give me a space to vent, give me my space to just like go in there and spew all of the things, because on top of like the negative emotions that I was feeling, I think this is really common for caregivers and something I want to point to and something I write about in the book. I was feeling angry. I was feeling resentful. I was, frustrated that my life was taken over and put on hold. This was not what I wanted. I of course wanted him to have somebody taking care of him, but I didn't want to be told, when he came home from the hospital after the bone marrow transplant, the doctor told me I needed to have my eyes on him 24 hours a day. That's literally impossible. I didn't want to give up every other thing in my life, and I was angry about it. But then, because especially as women, we're all socialized to care for other people and to be loving and kind and all of those things, I felt guilty and I felt ashamed about those negative emotions, which were perfectly natural and very common for caregivers. So there were these layers of emotions and meta emotions that were all so negative and that I was trying to like stuff down and put away. And therapy gave me an outlet for them. But, really, I eventually, and this is fast forwarding, but I had to reckon with a lot of those emotions, a lot of unprocessed grief, both from my mother's death and from Brad's illness years after the fact. Emotions don't go anywhere if you don't process them. And I really had not.
That is exactly right.
And so I had kind of a, little crisis of dealing with all of that. Actually, after my husband and I separated, it was sort of the grief of all of those things, the, impending divorce, the loss, the illness, because the illness really changed him. So that was a big loss of our relationship as well.
Yeah.
Changed him and changed me.
I'm going to stop us right there for our break, because I'm so grateful to you for saying all the things, because my answer was me too. I was pissed. I was mad. I didn't want this. We didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for it. We didn't sign up for it. And it had nothing to do with my love for my husband. It doesn't matter. I didn't want it. And so, and there will be so many people who are at home listening to this or watching this, nodding their head going, yeah, me too.
Yeah, and this is the only safe place to hear it.
Yeah.
They're afraid to say it.
Afraid to say it out loud. And because it takes courage to say it, because it's so socially unacceptable. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he'd be like that. We'll be right back.
All right, everybody, we're back here with Kate Washington. Wow, we have gotten into some
Yes.
truth. I mean, Kate, you threw it out there, and it is, and you said, there's those feelings as a caregiver. You get angry, you get resentful. There's a lot going on there. And then it brings in, here's the JJ, guilt, shame, and there's this hot mess of emotion. And if you don't deal with it, it ain't going away. I want to talk about, because this caregiver burnout thing, you hear it, it's kind of like take self-care and do this. But I want to talk about it because I want people to understand it and to know that it's okay. But let's talk about it. What were your feelings? We've talked about it a little bit, but tell me what you were experiencing, what the impact was on your life.
I felt depressed, anxious, really anxious, in part because of the, difficulty of the illness, empty a lot of the time, exhausted. I was not sleeping well. And when I was sleeping, it didn't feel very restful. I was physically clumsy and tight. Like I got into a place where like I was tripping over things, but like I didn't have time to like go to the doctor if my knee hurt or whatever. And I did keep going to the gym, but I couldn't work out or be in as healthy a place as I would have wanted to be. Just short-tempered, short with people, frustrated with, just easily frustrated, short fuse, and just never resting. That feeling of like always being on edge, that always being in that kind of fight or flight feeling, of like almost trembling all the time because you're so tightly strung and tightly wound. And I'll tell you, you commented at the beginning on the title of my book. It actually comes from taking a quiz on caregiver burnout. Like I had this bad, we were at a bad doctor's appointment. The doctor was like, you have to take better care of yourself because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of him. And I got pissed, but I went home and because I was like, okay, so I guess that's the only point of me. Like it's not good enough that I take care of myself. Or what if somebody else could take care of me a little bit? Wouldn't that be even better?
What a novel idea.
But I went home and I was looking for like resources, but I got the autofill from Google that said caregiver burnout. And it took me to a quiz. And when I took the quiz, the result I got was you're already toast.
Yeah.
And so I saved that. I actually tweeted. I was like, oh, I guess I found the title of my memoir as a joke, but then I made it the title of my memoir. I saved that phrase.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was, but I didn't realize I was in it, and I didn't realize kind of warning signs, and nobody's noticing really how the caregiver's doing most of the time. I think for a lot of families, and even for a lot of patients, the family's experience, but even like the patient's outcomes would be better if for chronic or really severe acute illnesses, the clinicians took the time to also assess the caregivers instead of saying like, okay, well, you need to be at this appointment at this time and this appointment at this time, and you need to have 24-hour eyes on him. And here's all the medications you'll be administering. Like when Brad came home from the hospital, he had 35 medications all on a different schedule. None of them were on auto renewal. So it was just constant, like figuring out when to give meds. And when he came home, he was still visually impaired. He's since recovered his vision, but he was functionally blind, couldn't walk, couldn't eat a full diet when all of this after his bone marrow transplant. And it was a very challenging time. That was like the worst time for me, was when he was at home, really still needing hospital level care, but, had been sent home over my protests. And that's something that I really like to point out, is that this is a systemic issue, the demands placed on caregivers. It's not because like your family isn't up to the challenge, or like you as an individual, just aren't working hard enough. And I think the reason so many caregivers are so exhausted and so burned out is that the health system, which has many strengths, one of its weaknesses is that it's cutting costs. And a way that it can cut costs is by saying like, oh, what if the people at the house did all of this?
That's right.
What if instead of having a nurse go flush people's IV lines, we had his wife or his daughter flush the lines or change the catheter or, do the wound care. People are being tasked with things that a generation or two ago a layperson never would have done.
Exactly.
And they're being asked to do it over a period of years. The average duration of care in the U.S. is something like 4.5 years, and the average number of hours a caregiver puts in is like 25 hours a week.
Yeah, and
it's higher for acute crisis. It does feel low.
Yeah,
but like that's a huge commitment that people are making without even being asked if they're willing to make it, just because they were with their parents at the appointment for the memory assessment or whatever it might be.
Yeah, whoever attends gets to be the winner.
It was like a winning statement, though. They were just expected to do it.
Of course, you're
never
asked. Like, of
you
course,
were never asked.
And think about the pressure that is. Like, think about like the doctors look at you, and then think about that, because doctors have a level of authority. And we have to put our trust in them. And if they think I can do it, well, I guess I can do it. Who am I to say I can't do it? And then there's you don't know about past experiences. Like that whole last piece is just like, can we just play that over and over and over again? Because you're totally right. And it's why caregivers make up about $600 billion in economic relief. And that's exactly this is exactly how our system is built on. Because if we actually had to provide the care, the healthcare system had to provide that level of care, it would collapse the entire system because number one, there's not workforce, and number two, there's not funding for it. It would be unaffordable. And so everybody just says, okay, and you're right. You know, man, I'm looking because I'm like, there's so much.
She's like
more.
our soapbox. We're like, let's just
soapbox in here. That's the thing.
And I mean, I don't know which one of you is older, but I am a good oldest daughter. And if somebody says, you have to do this, I'm like, somebody says jump, I say how high and try my best. And
I'm sorry, you're a people pleaser as well?
Gold star. Just a recovering one, I hope.
Me too.
We'll see.
Phil. I'm only partially met.
You are totally my sister. Yes, Kate, you are me, the oldest who will people please and will do whatever. Okay,
whatever it takes. I'll say this.
Is there a gold star at the end of this?
Yeah, can I get a sticker? Dude, can we have a sticker? Because I can be bought by a sticker. Like if you give me a sticker, even if they gave us stickers when we went to the doctor, like they give patients, things. But if I had a sticker and I walked down and said I'm the best caregiver, I'd walk through that lobby and being like, you damn right I am. Here I am. They gave me a sticker.
Not long ago when my dad had a surgery, my stepmom texted me from the hospital. They did give her a caregiver sticker. It didn't say best caregiver, but it said caregiver as opposed to visitor, which I actually thought was like, that's kind of an important step to recognize that role.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think there's slow recognition happening in some health systems, hopefully. And I think the pandemic kind of really pointed up like how essential the caregiver role is, because when we weren't allowed to be there bedside,
right.
It's not great for the patient. Like a lot of what I try to say about caregiving is like, yes, I want to be advocating for caregivers and what a challenging role that is. But the flip side of it is that it's also bad for patients if caregivers are overstressed and can't continue on. Their outcomes aren't going to be as good if there's nobody at home who can take care of them, if there's no support, like more broadly and more systemically for that role, because people need and deserve care. I'm not arguing like caregivers should all walk off the job and be done, but there just needs to be a better, more integrated form of support.
Well, and even heard. Include them as part of the treatment team. Include them as part of the treatment planning process, because I'm going to tell you, my husband has memory issues. And when you have chronic pain and especially in your husband's, my husband has chronic pain and then got cancer. And so then throw some meds on top of that. He couldn't tell you. And then also he's a people pleaser as well. So he didn't want to tell anybody he was having a hard time. It didn't matter. They'd thrown up that morning before he got there. He was doing just great. And I'm like, no, you weren't. Like, I just cleaned up like your vomit. And so, no.
I remember having some conversations with my husband bedside where like after rounds or something, he would have been like sitting up and being like, yep, I'm doing great. And I'm like, look, why don't you put on the good front for me and tell the doctors how it really is?
Yeah. That's the truth.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you this, it made me angry. It made me, and I couldn't figure out, and it still does today. I love my husband. I think it's really important, and he doesn't listen to this. But it was really, we went to the doctor, and he still does it today. He puts on a good front, and it makes me. And I told JJ, I called JJ after the appointment. I said, I'm so mad at Jason, and she was like, what's wrong? And I'm like, he doesn't tell the truth when he goes to the doctor. Like he puts on a glad face. And then we walk out and he starts complaining about how he doesn't feel good. And complaining sounds mean, but it's the truth because that's how I hear it. He starts complaining about it. I'm like, literally, we just paid this doctor. And like, I have no MD. And we could have had this opportunity. We missed it. And I'm like, and then I just want to go back in. And he's like, no. And so that's the part I think that's so hard. I feel like I know we were
just
at
like scratched the surface.
We just scratched the surface, and I feel like Kate needs to come back.
I know.
Because I'm super, super, super disappointed right now that we're at the end of our time.
Yeah, I know.
And so, because there's so much more, Kate, and please promise to say, yes, I will come back.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Yeah. And so, because I think the other thing that we didn't scratch on is we referenced it. You and your husband survived, spoiler alert, and you divorced. And that is a common thing that we talked about before we got started. It's more common than people realize for individuals who are caregiving for a person with a chronic illness, complex illness. I think it's 60%. I think it was AARP put it out, 60% divorce rates. And so, I mean, there are times, and I mentioned to you, Kate, there are times that I just wanted to walk away. Life would be easier if maybe you do need somebody else to care for you. Maybe I suck bad enough. This is where Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver came from. I sucked so bad. I felt so like I was doing a terrible job. I'm like, forget it. I'll walk away. So I want to pick up the next time, but we're going to do our questions because I think this is important.
Yeah.
Because we should always do sister questions.
Yes, sister questions.
Okay, Kate is definitely a sister.
I know.
Okay, Jay, what's your question?
My best sister.
What is your question?
I fired you. So question, you're at a different stage now.
Yeah.
How have you reconciled and moved on from burnout? Where did it, I say end, but where did you realize, hey, I can move past this?
I actually think it was after we separated, and I did some really intensive therapy and some like alternative modalities around like trauma recovery and some different things. Like, it took me that long though, because we separated in 2022 and the worst of his illness was 2016. So that's a long time.
Yeah.
But there were definitely steps along the way. And as he became more independent, where I was kind of reckoning with things, but I think it was not until I really fully delved into like what had happened in our family and my role, his role, the health system's role, all of it.
Oh yeah.
That I felt more recovered from it. But things still come up. Like I cannot stand the smell of hand sanitizer, for instance. And that's both a hospital response and a pandemic response, but it takes me right back.
Yeah.
It's activating.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I totally could see that. There's for me, it's not smells; it's certain phrases. When I go back to the doctor and we sit there and it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm back here again, and I don't want to be here. Do we? And of course I'm going to go because of course I'm going to go. It's like so silly to not, but then you get in there and you're like, oh, what if they tell us something bad?
Yeah.
And so because we associate doctors with bad, not doctors with good. Because we're not a preventative health system. We are a reactive health system. And so that's the why. Okay, so here is our fun question, because it's my fun question every time, and then you'll have a different answer the next time. What is your favorite guilty pleasure? What is the thing that you do? And this is guilty pleasures really just might as well be self-care.
Yeah.
But I think guilty pleasure is much more fun.
It is.
What is the thing that you do just for yourself? What is the thing that you do that brings you happiness just for you?
So the thing, I would not say it's a guilty pleasure at all, but a thing that I do that brings me a lot of happiness, well, it's anything to do with water. But a couple of years ago when I turned 50, I embarked on this project of like going to 50 different swimming holes before I turned 50, like 50 wild places to swim or soak or like hot springs, things like that. So that is, I still do that to this day. I made it to the 50. I kept a blog of them, and I'm actually now, I've written an essay about it that came out of about a year ago, but I'm at work on a book about that whole kind of quest. But I still do that. Like I'll take off during the week and go to like a favorite river or something like that during the summer. I'm sad right now because river season is over until next year. But, there are always hot springs. And I had, we didn't really have a backyard. We just had kind of this parking area behind the house. So after Brad's illness and when he was doing better and more stable, I had a little spa pool put in back there and have so my guilty pleasure just like on the daily kind of is like, It costs way too much to heat up that spa, but I do it anyway and am able to soak in there. So having my own little pool and soaking spot is probably my favorite.
Even without that, I would say the water. That's our sister Emily. Her cuisine is she just needs a bath. That is her. Like, she may not have a pool, but she'll just crawl in the bath, and it's just the water.
And she sends photos of her toes out because she's 6'1", so she does not
out of the bathtub.
fully fit in the bathtub. And so I think that's so funny. But I'm so glad that you said that, because we have hot springs here in Virginia. And so I feel like if you've not been to Virginia, it's for lovers. And so you'll love it here in Virginia. And our hot springs are good. And so you are welcome to come here to Virginia.
Thank you. I have not been to Virginia since I was in college, since I went to Washington, D.C., and I would go to some of the outlying areas for weekends and things like that.
Well, you have an honorary sister in Virginia. Okay. You're always welcome in Southwest Virginia.
I'm excited to find out more about this.
You'll like that. You'll like our hot springs. I'm not going to kid. I'm not done that as people come to do that. So, well, you know what? Thank you so much for being with us, Kate. This has been an absolute.
It has been a pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, just absolute lover. And we're going to bring you back because I want to hear more. Like, you have so much to give, and I think people are already like, what do you mean we're done? So we will get you back, and we'll have a part 2 with Kate, without question.
Yeah.
So, guys,
thank you.
Thanks so much for listening in, and until we confess again, we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Well, friends, that's a wrap on this week's confession. Thanks so much for listening in to the podcast. But before you go, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell your friends about the Confessions Show. Don't forget, visit our website to sign up for our newsletter, as well as connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and Twitter. You'll also find the video recording of all our episodes on the Confessions website and our YouTube channel. We'll see you next Tuesday when we come together to confess again. Till then, take care of you. Okay, let's talk disclaimers. We are not medical professionals and are not providing any medical advice. If you have medical questions, we recommend that you talk with a medical professional of your choice. As always, my sisters and I at Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver have taken care in selecting the speakers, but the opinions of our speakers are theirs alone. The views and opinions stated in this show are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of the Sisterhood of Care, LLC. Thank you for listening to the Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver podcast.